Hello, welcome to our CDAO Insurance Executive Tanks Wrap-Up on LinkedIn Live. My name is April Stackhouse. Welcome to CDAO Insurance Executive Tanks Wrap-Up on LinkedIn Live. My name is April Stackhouse. I'm one of the content directors. Many of you were able to participate in our Think Tanks conversation today, and we wanted a chance to reflect on some of the key themes. We'll also have some additional attendees joining us to hear what was discussed, as well as those who are watching this on demand. So welcome to all of you as well. Over the next 45 minutes or so, we'll be recapping and discussing reflections on the state of the insurance industry and remaining successful in an unclear future. If you have any questions for our panelists, please be sure to submit them in the comments if you're watching on LinkedIn Live or via the chat function if you're logged into the event platform. We'll do our best to get through as many as possible throughout the session, so please try to get them in early for a chance to have them answered live and on air. And with that, I'm going to panelists to join us. We're going to get them all online here. Great. All right. Well, that worked. It's the tricky part, making sure that everyone is on. So we've come here. So I want to welcome our panelists. Today we have Tom Fletcher, who is the VP of Data and Analytics at Partner Re, Daniel Grimmel, Head of Data at LC Genius, and Prashant Natarajan, Director of Data Science and Analytics at Unum. So welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for participating in our event today. I know it was a long day of conversations, but hope that you got a lot out of it and look forward to hearing more about your thoughts on what was discussed. So first, to kick off, I wanted to see if you can all share with me your biggest takeaways from your round discussion today. Was there anything that surprised you or anything that you're kind of going to go away and ponder? Tom, if you could share first.
Sure, thanks, April. I took away 5 key themes over the last couple of hours. One, there was a lot of interest in disruption, especially disruption due to COVID, availability of data, acceleration of the use of data as a result of COVID, and where we go from there. There's a lot of interest in where organizations are in their own maturity journey, right? Where they are in the use of data and or lack thereof. Tool completeness was a discussion for a while. What organizations are using what tools, and are there missing tools in the marketplace? But bigger than all of those was a lot of discussion around privacy, governance of data, and cultural readiness to understand the use of data and so forth. So those are the 5 key takeaways that I had.
Hey, Dan, you.
Yep, thanks, April. Appreciate that. I think some of my biggest takeaways are, just the nature of Policy Genius related to other insurance companies that are here. I mean, we're more of a marketplace and less of a actual carrier. So some of the problems described affect us in a different way. A lot of people describing the move to digital and paper processes and things like that. We definitely see the effects of those on our side, but we're a digital native company, so it's a little different for us. Whereas we're not scrambling internally to go digital, but we're actually trying to mitigate some of the effects from partnering with some of the carriers that are on this call when it comes to having to navigate paper processes that are other processes that aren't as automated or digital. So that was definitely interesting to be reminded of that. I would say some other takeaways. We had an interesting discussion early in the first session I was in around machine learning and ethics, and just the rise of I wouldn't say ethics as much as data regulation, the rise of and the risk of potential data regulations on what you can do, what data you have access to, how it's used in machine learning, and things like that, which was super fascinating. And then I think at the last session, my biggest takeaway, or a couple things I was definitely interested in as I was listening, was related to robot process automation and kind of the integration of machine learning and other types of rules-based processing within insurance processes. And one gentleman brought up an interesting example of, well, not necessarily like an algorithm or a robot that kind of functions on its own, but more of a system meant to augment what underwriters can do and help them do it better and faster. Which is definitely resonates with a lot of the work that we do. We have agents as well that partner with customers and carriers, and that's definitely an avenue that we're barking down in the future. Of, we can't always replace the agent, and that's okay. And they add a lot of value, but how can we make them better? How can we get better? How can we get data in their hands and help drive some more intelligence in their process and augment what they do versus replace it? So I think those were my biggest takeaways.
Great. Prashant, what about you? I know you and Tom were in the same conversation, but hopefully you got some different things out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've covered a lot of fertile ground over here. So rather myself and trod upon trodden ground, I'm going to talk about some of the other things that kind of stood up, that came up as conversation from both the panelists and the audience. So the first one I would say was the broad acknowledgement about the fact that it's not just technology, it's also people and process. So technology for technology's sake typically doesn't really take us to a happy place unless we are able to bring people along with us. And that means slowing down their apprehensions and also getting them excited, because both of those things exist in equal measure anytime you roll disruptive technology out in any organization. I think that's the first takeaway. The second one was, I think, a point that I made a couple of times in the two different panels, was that models and visualization are not by themselves, but they are a means to the end. So what that means is we should be able to take off the data, whether we are doing simple analytics on it or you're doing advanced analytics on it, and then take the insight out of that and contextualize it where somebody sits and in what part of the workflow they are in. So being able to take the insights and putting our data to work through workflow systems. And the workflow system is not just ERP or CRM or benefits management or underwriting systems. It could be as simple as an Excel spreadsheet. And being able to do, I think, extremely important. The third one is, I think, an important topic in regulated industries, regulated verticals in general, insurance obviously being a prime example of that. Is on one hand, we want to govern the data, we want to manage privacy and protected information very, very carefully, and also share it and use it on a need to have, need to see basis. But on the other hand, there's always the tension between how do you manage that on one hand, and also liberate that data where privacy and governance become an excuse not to change, right? So it's a fine balance that we have to maintain. Innovation require that balance to be maintained. And the point that one of the panelists made was there is the law, and then there is ethics, and then there is fairness. And especially as you bring things like artificial intelligence and machine, primarily the area where I deal with, it's not just what letter and the spirit of the law say, but also more importantly, are we doing the right thing? Right? Ethics is something that we do when nobody is watching, and we know that it doesn't matter whether you get caught or not. It's still the right thing to do. And then going a level beyond ethics is making sure that the data are fair to our consumers. The last topic, which I didn't want to bring up in the interest of not advertising my book, it came up. Happy to see it come up and be recognized, is the fact that a one-size data quality doesn't fit, frankly. because if you're going to take a look at data quality, and somebody made this excellent point about what is the meaning of policy, and depending, or what, even something more basic, what's the meaning of a customer? So if you look at it from a marketing and sales perspective, the meaning of a customer and the definition of a customer is different from, for example, what the benefits organization is looking at a customer as. And so the idea of data fidelity, which is the quality data, appropriateness of data in the context of its use and in the context of its user, is going to be more important than this one size fits all data quality, which generally doesn't work in real life.
Great. Excellent thoughts. So there was a lot discussed, a lot of thoughts were shared. How do you see today's conversation now leading to changes within your existing processes or within your mindset? Daniel, I'm going to come to you first for that one.
I don't know if it's gonna change as much as what I was expecting to do in my daily process, as much as reaffirm that we were heading down the right track. I think on the agent side and thinking about augmentation, that was definitely interesting and definitely something that kind of reaffirms the direction I was going. I think in the insurance space, the agent or the underwriter is definitely like a critical value add in a lot of places. So if you can get them to handle, 3 to 4 more cases a day, 3 or 4 more applications a day, I mean, just imagine what that does to your business when you scale that across the rest of your agents. So those are the types of things that I think were reaffirmed learning from others today as well. So I would say that that's probably the biggest reaffirmment, and not necessarily a change in what I do, but definitely the biggest reaffirmment. I think some of the other things that were mentioned are less of an issue on our side, around data centralization and kind of interacting with different sources of truth. We have less of a problem with that, which is great, just because, I mean, we're kind of born online with open source architecture and software, and so we did a good job at kind of keeping everything centralized and integrated, as opposed to having really old legacy systems like some other companies kind of have to deal with today. So I think those are my biggest takeaways, as far as like what today's conversations drove and how I would adjust or change my process or what I would do.
Yeah, I think, it's definitely different for you coming from more of that startup disruptor mindset versus these companies that have been doing this for a long time. So definitely interesting to hear that perspective for sure. Great. Tom, I'll turn it over to you. Any thoughts on what you may change, or, did this reaffirm your views? What are your thoughts on that?
I think I would agree. It's mostly a reaffirmation. I draw on my psychology background all the time. Despite the fact that we are focused on data, I'm personally focused on moving people, right? Getting the assessing readiness as we talk about culture, assessing attitudes, and figuring out how to bring the right people along at the right time. And I won't remember all the metaphors and the clever things that were said today, but I'm reminded that many were brought up, and there were some clever stories that were shared, and hopefully I'll remember 1 or 2 of those, or begin to sharpen my own pencil as to what metaphors or analogies could I use to help people understand sometimes technical concepts. There was a very clever comment here that's relevant, I think, in the insurance industry, as someone said that shift to, they specifically said the cloud, but I would inject that to shift to any technology is not risk transfer. It's not an obfuscation of your own duties or responsibilities, right? And so, not that I've ever thought about it that way, but there's 2 sides to that, is to sharing with someone who's apprehensive about migrating from an old technology to a new technology, reaffirming to them that we're not doing that in a way to get out of our responsibilities. We still hold those responsibilities, and we're still going to be critical about how they're used. But on the other hand, also the person who might be a little bit too open and not critical enough to say, we still have to mind our responsibilities and manage the appropriate risk there. The final thing that is not a shift in my mindset, but was interesting to pick up on, is a number of people, would talk about different functions in their organization having different vocabulary, right? We may use the exact same word in underwriting, claims, or actuarial, and they don't necessarily mean the same thing. And just sort of reaffirming that it's helpful that regardless of the conversations we have, ensuring that we're on the same page and that we're in real understanding of what is being said is important. And we often, working with data, we often sit at the intersection of those different functions.
Hey, Prashant, do you want to share your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say again, it was a affirmation rather than any, brand new. I will say that I was happy to see that some of my own opinions and biases were supported by most of the participants, if not all. So that was a good thing, because I think there was also another fundamental takeaway for me, which is how much similarity there is among the different insurers that exist, whether it's a digital first insurer like Policy Genius, where Daniel is, or some of the folks from the health side of the house who were on the call, or life, or short-term and long-term ability. I think the opportunities are similar. The challenges are also similar. And more importantly, there is a keen desire to put this data to work through appropriate mechanisms in order to improve the customer experience, improve the internal. One of the other things I would say is, I think when we start looking at data, we've always heard this, it's almost a cliche now, that data is the new oil. And then everybody tries to come up with their own thing. Oh, no, 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 it's the new oil, it's the new whatever it is. But the point is, the data has to be put to work and it has to be put to use, because just as you can't run a car on crude oil, frankly, or you can't get plastics out of it, or whatever products we create out of crude oil, the ability to reuse the same amount of data or the same data set for multiple uses while acknowledging those different meanings, semantic meanings, is also something which I heard consistently across board.
I know the idea of data ethics, but that was a big part of the conversation, at least that I sat in. So I wanted to dive into that a little further. Wanted to hear a little bit more how you've changed your business processes or how you've evolved as a company in your data analytics roles as customers have more aware of how their data is used over the past few years. So Prashant, I'm going to come back to you with that one right now.
So I think the key thing, one of the things that we do well over here is we have a concept of test and learn, which is basically a multi-week or a multi-month test and learn. And it's because we scale it out sometimes with hundreds of users before we put something into production. And especially when you're in the regulated space that we are in, you cannot afford to make mistakes. And if mistakes do happen, because in the end we are all human, let's try it out for an appreciable time. And it's not just mistakes, it's also optimization. So solution through a test and learn process before we scale it out to a larger audience or a larger set of internal or external users. And I think data ethics is a much larger conversation. And as I think touched upon earlier, there is the law, which I would say is kind of the bare minimum standard. One of the participants, I think, made an excellent comment that the law is like an airbag. It's there to protect you, but you don't deploy the airbag every single time. You wear a seatbelt. So the seatbelt is the ethics, professional ethics and personal ethics that each of us brings to the table. The law is your airbag. And while we must always follow the letter and the spirit of the law, to me, ethical uses of data boils down to which is the golden rule: do unto others, right? If we have to look at ethics from a standpoint of, are we using the data in the right, are we protecting the customer's information appropriately, are we doing that appropriately at the larger group level, and are we doing it at the individual level, are we making sure our algorithms are fair, and there is equality of treatment and there's equality of outcomes. And I think any ethical program use of data should, and we practice that, we look at both equality of treatment as to how the data is used and equality of outcomes, which is making sure that the outcomes are fair.
Daniel, you nodding your head along with some of that. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, ethics are something that we think about a lot, especially with more and more machine learning that we want to do. I would say we do a couple of things, or, and I would say since I've been a policy genius, this has been a focus as well as we use data more and more in general. But we have a strong security and legal team that I often bounce things off of. So that includes like when we're evaluating software partners, we're looking at sharing data, like protection is always like at the top of our minds. We want to know, what have we committed to with our customers? What can we, cannot, and what can we not do with their data? And really make sure that we're not putting ourselves in a situation where we're using customer data for things that our customers don't know we're using it for. And that comes down to our privacy policies and all that good stuff. So we have a strong process, both from like contractual like review perspective, as well as like, hey, just when I want to do interesting things with data, I usually consult that team to get a perspective on what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. I would say outside of that, we start getting into elements of machine learning. Things that can happen with your machine learning algorithms are they can start to learn inherently biased patterns, et cetera, depending on what you include into them. So we try to attack that on two fronts. Number one, it's about like what do we tell our models? What variables do we pass in? Are we inherently passing in variables that could disenfranchise certain groups? And that's something that you be super careful of. Another thing that we do a lot with our models as well is not just bias from a human perspective, but bias in the statistical perspective as well. We try to watch out for, in the sense of, if you're injecting a machine learning model into an automatic process and you're having it make decisions, if it makes decisions consistently enough, you inherently create biased data and a predetermined outcome. So we inject an element of randomness back into our data sets to allow for forms of exploration and picking up of new patterns, et cetera. So we're not always just refitting our data on outcomes that we've altered. And that's becoming more and more prevalent as we're building more and more machine learning processes, et cetera, to help us combat swinging what happens to folks in one direction or the other, as far as like how they flow through our process or the types of messaging they receive, et cetera. And then I would say kind of like the last tactical thing there that we've definitely been thinking about a lot has been just our internal use of data and access control. And this sounds crazy because, we're at a startup and you would think startups are just loosey-goosey with all this stuff, but we're not actually. We have a strong security team. And again, even internally, we try to avoid internal access to PII and we try really hard to protect the privacy of our users so that they don't lose trust in us. And also we can do things responsibly without compromising somebody's privacy. So I would say those are the types of things we think about on the ethics side.
Absolutely. Tom, what about you?
Sure, thanks, April. You know, I usually try to start with what are we trying to solve, and on the while the principles and the ethics involved don't really differ, whether I'm talking about management or protection of data or usage of data or the analytic work products that we create from that data, some of the things that we do may differ. The lens that we put on it may differ. But if I'm trying to solve, you know, something with a model or predictive model or some kind of analytic tool, I'm creating some efficiency, consistency, finding opportunities, making better decisions. That's sort of the four buckets of the way I think that use is. And you always have to ask yourself, are we doing this for the right reasons, right? Are we doing it on behalf of the intended target? That might be the consumer. Or are we doing it in concert with what the business needs? Or are we doing it off in a vacuum somewhere that doesn't take any of that into consideration? But there are three principles. I recently was looking across several bodies of ethics, several different boards that were looking at, you know, governing bodies, and three themes came up that I think are relevant for data, and that is objectivity, integrity, and fairness. You can pick any ethics board, and there will be 7 or 8 different ones, but those were the three that stood out to me as being quite common, and those often will reflect well on three concepts that we talk about in modeling, and that is the reliability of the data, the validity of the model, that is how well the model predicts. Does it do what you say it's supposed to do? They don't always, but you should ensure of that before you put it into use. And then finally, what's the fairness of the output of that model? And Prashant already mentioned this to some extent, but we will look at models, for example, against certain protected class and say, are we disproportionately selecting one class over another? For example, if we're picking a risk, right? Is it that we're going to allow more men to flow through a system for some reason than women? Why is that? And there better be you know, a valid argument behind that, a data-driven argument behind that, or else we need to go back to the drawing board and revise our model until we get more equality of outcome, right? Less adverse impact of the use of that model. So that's those are the things that we're doing, and we're working with carriers to help them think about those things. We're also working with vendors as we encounter vendors who are developing models and you know, very rightfully so, helping the industry solve problems. But you know, we want to help them make sure that they're looking at those three standards of ethics as well: the objectivity, integrity, and fairness.
And April, if I may add to that, I think the first thing is also to acknowledge that data is inherently biased. And we sometimes think of data as being bits and bytes that are the objective truth. It rarely is. Data is created by humans, it's created for humans, or it's created by systems that humans have created. So bias doesn't necessarily always mean bias. It could also be positive reinforcement bias. You may not be doing against somebody, but you might be privileging somebody, frankly. So understanding and accepting the fact that data is inherently biased allows us to take a more objective view of why we need to put such programs in place in order to manage that data.
That's such a great point, Prashant. Thank you for bringing that up. So next I wanted to talk a little bit more. I know we touched on AI and ML a little bit, but really kind of diving into one advancements that you've seen be achieved by taking data and technological capabilities in new directions. So have you seen that's kind of coming down the pike as some new technologies that you think will help you in your role, or what's even hurting possibly? So I wanted to start with Tom on that one.
Yeah, thanks. Let me start by saying that I see as much advancement in utilization using technologies that have been around for 50, 60, 70 years or more, as things that I see that people think suddenly were developed yesterday. That's not to say, and I can get into those, but sometimes, an organization is not leveraging data to its fullest. And all I mean by that is they may just have the data. They may calculate a mean off of something, and that's as far as they may take that. And sometimes you may go, well, we can use some simple modeling techniques like a regression or something like that, which has been around for a very long time. And all of a sudden people are wowed by, oh, you mean you can take into account all these situations. And when I say, but this depends on, and you can't do this because it depends, like I can model it depends. So there are things like that you can really impress people by not necessarily using the latest and the greatest. That being said, there are a lot of powerful tools to help us winnow through very wide data sets. So for example, if I have something that may not be very well understood, and I say, hey, I need a baseline of this. What of these 200 things that are in here, is there 10 that are empirically relevant? And then after that, we'll apply these, objectivity, integrity, fairness to it to say, okay, but all of those 10, do we need to use all 10 of those inputs? And so there are many tools that are emerging that are allowing us to use machine learning techniques to do that in a very rapid fashion, where elsewhere and there's no substitute for talking to your business. Let me make no mistake about that. You need to talk to your business partners and understand the processes and what we're trying to solve. And when you see odd things in the data, why is that? Let's make sure that the data is not actually taking us in the wrong direction, which it very well could. There's many examples we could create for that. There's a lot of automating machine learning techniques. You don't have to be a fan of taking that all the way to production, but there is some use in simplifying at least parts of the workflow for the analysts. So.
Daniel, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, April, I love this question. I would say on the technology side, number one, agree to all of Tom's points. All those points make sense, right? And technology is a means to an end in some cases, and you really want to focus on business problems and adding value first before shiny new objects. But one thing that I'm definitely focused on my side is increasing our machine learning velocity, right? And what I am really excited about is there are a lot of new SaaS companies and tools that have popped up that essentially take the machine learning process and build like a studio for your data scientists to work in. And that's really, really exciting. And if you look at it, the landscape, and compare it to 2 or 3 years ago, I see new people popping up every day. I get so many messages on LinkedIn from SaaS vendors that are like, oh, I have this machine learning project, machine learning studio, blah, blah, blah. Your data scientists can be more efficient. And that's all fantastic and great. And I mean, we're excited to be evaluating those tools and see what the right fit is for us. We've so far gone down the road of script local, push to a cloud repository, automated in cloud, and those things just aren't optimal for us anymore, especially with how fast we want to scale and build velocity there. So some of these new tools are really exciting to take a look at. I'm also going to flip your question, and I'm going to say, what are technology trends I wish I saw? And I heard somebody say this before, and I vehemently agree with it. And that's on the visualization and BI side. I don't think BI software has changed for the last 30 years. It seems like it's all the same, and it's really kind of like frozen in time with how it's used to democratize data and allow access to data and analytics for everybody. I haven't seen a provider that's actually cracked that, and I wish they would, because the old methodology of write SQL, get charts, it's outdated, and there are options out there that try to turn that on its head, but there's still trade-offs with those options as well that still don't fully democratize data for folks, which would improve. So.
Well, if any of our vendors out there hear that, then we're looking for some new BI software out there. Great. Prashant, any points you want with that as well?
So I think we are at the cusp of a truly revolutionary of affairs in the insurance industry. And one of the things is people see others doing things, and there's also increased executive acknowledgement what these things mean. Before my current role, I was with one of the big four firms doing a lot of strategic advisory globally. And one of the things that I saw was the cloud increasingly is more relevant and useful. And for those of us who have been in the regulator while, will realize that the chance of you getting a GPU to be stood up in a server in your data center is not going to be easy. So go to the cloud instead. Use GPU as a service to accelerate things, and you get it typically for pennies on the dollar. So it's not just about scalability, but also being able to access more tools, being able to do more experiments is very important. The second thing is the average success of an AI/ML program in any industry across board, depending on whose report you read, is anywhere from 10 to 20%. We are doing 100% right now, with every single experiment that we have done has actually gone into production. And you don't get to that by throwing a coin and wishing that it lands on tails every time. You do it with a process. You keep the end in mind. You bring your business users on board. And more importantly, you get your data scientists to understand that if they have to get their hands dirty with data engineering, they should. If they have to create a chart or two to make things more understandable, they should. Data science cannot just be this rarefied thing of I'll play with algorithms and I'll create predictive models or do NLP. Do have to do to make the business successful.
That makes a lot of sense. And kind of on this technology side of things, are you having any difficulty ROI for your data and analytics spend? I know obviously we're in an increasingly competitive and unstable market environment. Have you seen that change, or is that something that you've kind of worked past? I'm going to start with Daniel for that one.
I would say, I mean, rightfully so, depending on the spend. And SaaS vendors, if you're out there, you are expensive. I've had about a normal amount of time proving ROI, if that makes sense. So I do expect with larger contracts to get some pushback, and for people to want to understand the place the software I'm trying to acquire or the technology I'm trying to acquire is filling. I would say, like, for more internally facing things that we develop that we don't pay for, or we pay for it in a different way through labor. I would also say we're trying to be more cognizant of demonstrating internal ROI, if that makes any sense. So instead of just jumping to ML model and algorithm, let's really be smart about where we invest our capacity and invest our data scientists on the biggest potential wins, versus just any old model that we could develop that may or may not have a high ROI. So I would say, just because our company is evolving and we're growing, we're trying to do a better job at staying focused, staying scoped, and really making sure that where we invest any labor dollar is driven towards ROI and our goals as a company. So I would say that those two things kind of inherently define what technology investments look like for us and how important ROI is and isn't. When it comes to like labor bets, like that's what they are. They're bets. So you should have a strong hypothesis going in about where you're investing your labor. But again, they're bets. So the only way, back to points that I've made already, the only way to validate those bets is through testing and learning and iterating.
Prashant, what about you?
I think there's a couple of things to this, right? The first thing is when we talk about ROI, there is no glory in experimentation alone. You got to take it into production, you got to put it into workflow, you got to get people using it. And I think that's the first step in the process. We talk about ROI, but ROI on what? ROI on an average of 15% of success with AI ML in this industry? Of course not. Your ROI by definition is going to be towards one side, frankly, right? So the thing before we talk about ROI is to make sure that a lot of what we do actually succeeds. Because successes, whether small successes or large successes, will both lead towards first building mindshare and building excitement. And then the next step in the process is looking at ROI. ROI can be looked at from multiple perspectives. The one perspective is, are you putting your data to work? Number one, right? And how much of your data is static sitting in a repository somewhere that nobody uses or uses for a quarterly report and no more? And are you finding new uses for the data? That is more of a, I would say it's both qualitative and quantitative. The second thing is depending then on who the application, the analytics application is built for, or the AI ML solution is built for, it could differ. If, for example, you're building an application for your sales team, your ROI measure is, am I seeing a bottom line increase in sales, right? And how are you able to then connect that to your specific application? That's often the question, because it could be a process related change. It may not be analytics alone. It could also be operating expenses. Are you able to reduce your operating expenses, for example? So the growth side of the house or the expense side of the house. Another thing could be number of users. Do you have, for example, in a department of 500 benefit specialists, are all of them using it? And taking surveys regularly, which is something that we do often, which is we do surveys every 2 weeks to measure that. Are you using it? If you're not using it, why are you not using it? What's happening? So that is more of quantitative feedback. It's not growth, it's not OpEx, but it still tells you what percentage of users are using it and what are things that you can improve as a result. But I think it's very important for us to do that because, like you pointed out, April, we do live in trying times where every dollar is any company that doesn't measure how its dollar is going to be spent is, I don't think there's anybody like that today. So it's incumbent on us as data and analytics professionals to make sure that we are proactive about ROI discussions and we think through the metrics of what defines ROI even before we start an effort.
Great. And Tom, I'd love to wrap up with you on this.
Sure, I won't reiterate just because of time, but second a lot of Daniel's and Prashant's messaging that where you're focused within which business unit and which function matters, but a little bit of relationships go a long way here too. But the bottom line is you want to focus on the highest value propositions, right? So no one likes to spend a year on something and then someone say, why did you bother doing that? Well, because you asked me to. Oh, I forgot. Those never go well, right? So focus on the things that you believe will impact the business in the most. A couple of points that I will say is I've seen great models crash and burn, right? So people spend a great deal of time. The model is a superstar model, but no one figured out how to integrate it into the workflow. There was no change management plan, this, that, and the other. So just because the model is superior does not mean it's going to be a success story. I've seen mediocre models be high impact, have high utility, because of where they're deployed, because of the change management strategy around it, and so on and so forth. So, you know, this will be a great disappointment for the data scientists, right? But AUC is okay, but it's not a panacea, right? So it can go both ways. But that also depends on which function you're pointing that at, right? And so there are things that I might do in marketing that will have high value that similar metrics of measurement would not give me the same value in, say, underwriting or claims or something like that. A couple of odd things is that, you know, think about this, is like sometimes I build a model and I implement it somewhere and I got to think, are there more than one area of the organization impacted here? And is there more than one metric to assess ROI on? Quick example is if I build a model to penetrate your property and casualty business by selling or cross-selling another product, I not only can show ROI by the increased sales of the product that we're talking about, but there may be an ancillary effect of reducing the lapse of the product that we're penetrating into, right? So now so there's a couple of metrics there in different lines of business that could be impacted. Finally, sometimes it's just this way, that the outcome is binary, right? Before I gave you this, you couldn't do what it is that you want to do. And I don't know how to measure that other than you couldn't do it before, right? And so now you've been made capable, and a whole function or the whole activity there that you can do. Which reminds me of one last thing, and that is that sometimes the metrics are qualitative in nature, that there's a whole shift in way of doing business. Like I helped you completely rejigger your workflow, whatever it was, because you couldn't do it without whatever the analytics or what we brought to the table. And that's qualitative. I don't know how to measure that other than, you know, you created some efficiencies or some gain that you feel like you know, we want to rejoice together about being able to do that we couldn't have done before the fact.
Yeah. Great. Well, unfortunately, we're all out of time, but I want to thank our panelists and all of you out there for joining us today. I think there have been some really great conversations, and hopefully some things will trickle over to all of your businesses and help you out there. A reminder to check out Cranium's other content and events on our website. And if you haven't already done so, make sure you're following the Business of Data on LinkedIn and subscribe to the platform. Also, be sure to download our latest report on the business of data, exploring how insurance sector data leaders are safeguarding business continuity, transforming processes, and improving customer experiences in this age of COVID-19. Thank you so much. We hope to virtually see you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.